Welcome back to the next section of Visual Studio Code training with Docker. And this section, we're going to cover the Docker Context Lab. We're actually going to deploy Docker and Docker. We're going to be able to switch contexts within Visual Studio Code's Docker extension. We're going to launch containers within this new context, and we'll be able to see in Visual Studio Code the difference, what's going on, and quickly be able to interact with different hosts using the same interface. So let's get started. Again, the lab is over in the Visual Studio Code Docker training repo, and we are on number 4, power user mode, and it's the last lab in power user mode. So scroll down to number 6 at the bottom, and you see connect to Docker host direct from VS Code. We're gonna do all these steps in our editor. So let's head over to Visual Studio Code. I already have the markdown actually open in Visual Studio Code. So step 6, and essentially, if I head over to the Docker desktop or Docker extension, you can see I have context. I have Brian's Docker, default, DigitalOcean. We're using the default context right now. You see these are all the containers that are running locally on my laptop. And now the first thing we're going to do, we're going to launch Docker and Docker. Since this is a long command, I'm just going to copy this directly from the lab. I'm going to launch this. And Docker, as I mentioned previously, is a Docker container with Docker installed, which it's basically another Docker server running in a container. And now we've actually launched this, and you can see up here in our containers, the 1903 Docker and Docker is running. Now what we're gonna do, we're gonna create a context. Now we can create context different ways. You can do it directly through the UI, but this is usually if you wanna create a context for Azure. But if you wanna create context for, Docker or just cloud hosts, you can do it right here. So create context, and you can see is Docker context create. Docker and Docker is the name, and what kind of context is a Docker context, and the host equals basically localhost 2375, and it tells you what kind of orchestrator it is, Swarm, and that's all we need. So it creates a context. Go ahead and copy that, run that command. And now you see over to the left, let me get myself out of the way here. You can see over to the left, now I have this DND context. And what I can do now is actually right click on this context and click use. And now you see it's switching, and the UI is a bit slow, so you can actually refresh, and you can see it's refreshing quite quick. This little button right here, the refresh. And now you can see there's no containers running, there's no images, registries. I mean, all these things are empty. So we have an empty server. All right, let me move the terminal up a little bit. So now you can see we've actually switched contexts. And what we are gonna do now, we switch to DND, and we're gonna launch a container within this Docker container. And to do that, we're gonna launch a cat container. It's by my fellow captain, Mike, and he's created this cat container. So just copy this Docker run command, or if you have another container you want to run, you can also do it. And we're just going to copy that in there, start it, and it's actually pulling the image into this container. It's starting the container. All right, now it's started. Now you can see this container started within the other container. So it's completely a separate instance running. I can actually attach to a shell, all these things. So I'm actually attaching 3 levels deep. So I attach to a container running Docker, and then in the container of the cat container. So you can see it's as if my Visual Studio Code's installed locally on that machine. I'm able to connect to different environments and actually manipulate what's going on, which is really handy because now I don't have to SSH into machines and install Visual Studio Code all over the place. I can have one Visual Studio Code and connect to all these different servers. Much more secure because you don't have to expose Docker to all these different ports. You can use SSH, you can just go all over the place. Now you can see my containers, I stopped here. I have my mic container. Now if I want to go back to my default context, I just right click, use, and it's now switching back to my local laptop deployment, and there you go. And now you see all the containers pop back, the images, and everything's back to normal. So Docker context is super powerful because I use it for like cloud instances. I have instances deployed in Amazon. So there's different context for Amazon. There's a different context for DigitalOcean. So I can easily connect to these different contexts do some work, but bring my entire development environment with me. So, Docker extension, all my great tools and tricks, I bring that wherever I go. So I don't have to reinstall Visual Studio Code everywhere. I continue using the same interface, less context switching. It's brilliant. All right, that's it for the Docker context, or connecting to remote Docker hosts. And that's it. We have completed Docker context. We're able to successfully connect to different Docker hosts. We created a context. We connected to the context. We launched a container within this context, and then we're switching back and forth. Really great stuff. I can really recommend setting this up, creating a bunch of different servers, and I'll drop the context documentation down below on how you can set up your own context for cloud servers or SSH or wherever you want to connect to. It's really a wonderful tool. And just kind of review that we've completed the lab, the Docker context. Join me in the next section as we recap the Docker Power User Mode Visual Studio Code and really understand what we have achieved in this amazing section. We bootstrapped, we did all these great things. So join me in the next section as we recap this section.